Nadia Calloway had a talent for being forgotten. Not in a sad way, in a useful way. She could walk into a room full of important people, refill a water glass, place a folder on a table, and walk back out without a single person looking up. She had learned, over many years, that the best secretaries were the ones nobody noticed. She was, by all measures, the best secretary Roman Voss had ever had. Roman Voss. The name alone was enough to make grown men straighten their ties and lower their voices. He was 40 years old, tall, with dark eyes that seemed to be calculating something every moment he was awake. He ran a luxury development company on paper. What he ran underneath the surface of that paper was a different matter entirely, a matter that Nadia had learned not to think about too carefully in her 5 years of working for him. She had taken the job out of necessity. Her mother had been sick. The salary Roman offered was twice what anyone else in the city would pay a secretary. She told herself it was temporary. 5 years later, she was still there, sitting at the glass desk just outside his office, answering calls and managing his calendar with a precision that made her indispensable and, at the same time, completely invisible. Roman never looked at her the way men sometimes looked at women. He looked at her the way a person looks at a well-made clock, with appreciation for how reliably it worked, and no particular curiosity about how it felt. Nadia was 31 years old, full-figured and warm-faced, with careful eyes and steady hands. She wore navy and gray. She kept her hair pinned up. She asked nothing of him and gave everything the job required. That was their agreement, unspoken but understood. The night that changed everything was the night of the charity gala. It was held in the Grand Meridian Hotel, a place where chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls and the waiters moved as silently as shadows. Nadia was there in a professional capacity. She was always there in a professional capacity. She wore a dark burgundy dress that she had bought 2 years ago and never found an occasion for. It fit her well. She noticed Roman notice it, just once, across the room. A glance so quick she almost thought she had imagined it. There was a power failure in the East Wing at 11 o'clock. The backup generators restored most of the lights within minutes, but for those few dark, warm minutes, something strange happened. Roman had been standing near the terrace railing, looking out at the city with a glass of champagne he had barely touched. Nadia had walked over to tell him his car had arrived. The darkness caught them both off guard. And then the talking started, quiet talking, honest talking, the kind that only seems possible when the lights go out and the careful social masks loosen just a little. He asked her where she was from. She told him. He told her something she had not expected, that he had grown up in the same part of the city, in a building 3 streets from hers, long before he was anyone. He sounded, for those few minutes, like a real person. She had not thought of him as a real person before. It had been safer not to. By Monday morning, he was completely himself again. Cold. Exact. Unreachable. He walked past her desk without a word and closed his office door. Nadia filed the memory away like a document she would never need to retrieve. She was good at that. She put her feelings in folders and locked the folders in drawers and got on with the work. 6 weeks later, she sat on the floor of a pharmacy restroom with a small white stick resting face down on the tiles beside her. She already knew what it would say. She had known for 9 days, the way a person knows something before they are ready to name it. When she finally turned it over and looked at it, she did not cry. She sat very still for what felt like a long time. Then she washed her hands, smoothed her skirt, and walked back out into the afternoon. For 2 full weeks, she told no one. She went to work. She answered calls. She made his coffee the way he liked it, black, no sugar, too hot for a normal person. She looked at him across the boardroom table during the Tuesday meetings and understood something with complete and unsentimental clarity: Roman Voss did not love her. He had never looked at her long enough to begin. If she told him, she would not become a person to him. She would become a situation. She made her decision quietly. She called her oldest friend, Dr. Sylvie Okafor, who was an obstetrician and the only person on earth Nadia trusted completely. She told Sylvie everything. Sylvie listened without interrupting. When Nadia finished, Sylvie said only, "Tell me what you need." What she needed was time. She began making plans. She did not resign. She did not pack dramatically. She did not write a letter explaining herself. Over the following 3 weeks, while continuing to do her job flawlessly, she quietly transferred every important file, every password, every process document to a format that would allow someone else to step in without confusion. She was, if anything, more thorough than usual. She gave her replacement everything they would need before that replacement even existed. Then, on a Thursday evening, after placing the final updated schedule on Roman's desk, she took her framed photograph of her late mother, her chipped clay coffee mug, and her coat, and she walked out of the building. Roman arrived on Friday morning and did not immediately notice she was gone. He sat down, opened his email, reached for his coffee, and found no coffee. He pressed the intercom. No answer. He pressed it again. Silence. He walked to the door of his office and looked at her desk. The surface was clear. Not cleared in a hurried way. Clear in the way of something that had been very carefully attended to. He stood there for a moment longer than he would have liked to admit. He called Marcus within the hour. Marcus was his head of security, a large, quiet man who had worked for Roman for 12 years and who had, in that time, seen Roman make decisions that most men would not sleep well after. Roman told him he needed to find his secretary. He said it in the voice he used when things were not negotiable. Marcus did not ask why. He said, "I'll get started." The search was efficient and well-resourced, and it found nothing. Nadia had moved twice in 48 hours, with Sylvie's help. She had paid for things in cash. She had taken trains instead of flights. She had done everything correctly, and she had done it without panic, which told Marcus something he kept to himself: this woman had planned this. She had not run away. She had walked away, deliberately, on her own terms. When Marcus went to see Dr. Okafor, she met him at the door of her clinic with calm, pleasant eyes and the air of a person who has nothing to hide and no intention of helping him. She offered him tea. He declined. He asked his questions. She answered none of them. He left. Meanwhile, Nadia was living in a quiet apartment 2 cities away, in a neighborhood where nobody knew her name. The apartment had one window that faced a small courtyard where pigeons gathered every morning. She liked the pigeons. She ate well. She walked every day. In the evenings, she wrote in a notebook, not a diary exactly, more like letters she was writing to no one in particular. Or perhaps to Roman. She never decided. She wrote about what it had felt like to be invisible for 5 years. She wrote about being good at a job that treated her like furniture. She wrote, "I was so reliable that I stopped seeming real to him. And somewhere along the way, I started to wonder if I was real to myself." She wrote about the night of the gala, and about Monday morning, and about the way he had not looked at her. She wrote that she did not believe he was a bad man. She believed he was an incomplete one. And she did not have the time or the safety to wait for him to become more. Roman, for his part, was not sleeping well. He told himself it was about the child. He had found out about the pregnancy the way he found out about most things, through channels that were not supposed to exist. A flag in a database. A medical record that his security team had no business accessing. He knew. He had known for days before she disappeared, and he had handled it exactly as badly as she had predicted he would. He had called her into his office. He had used words like "staying" and "mine" without once asking her a single question. He had spoken at her, not to her. He had told her what was going to happen as though she were a schedule he was adjusting. She had listened. She had nodded. And then she had walked out and never come back. In his worst moments, alone in the large and expensive silence of his apartment, Roman admitted to himself that he had deserved exactly that. It was his mother who finally said it out loud. Elena Voss lived 3 hours outside the city in a house so small it could fit inside Roman's living room. She had chosen that smallness deliberately, after a lifetime of largeness in the wrong sense. Roman drove out to see her on a Sunday, something he had not done in over a year. He sat at her kitchen table, which was the size of a card table, and told her what had happened. He left out the parts he was not proud of. Elena, who had known him for 40 years, heard those parts anyway. When he finished, she poured them both tea and said nothing for a while. Then she said, "You told her she was staying. You did not ask her if she wanted to." "That's not the point," Roman said. "It is the only point," Elena said. She told him something then that she had never told him before. She told him about his father. Not the version Roman knew, the distant, indifferent man who had eventually faded from their lives, but the earlier version. The one who had also used words like staying and mine. The one she had spent 8 months quietly planning to leave. The one she had finally, carefully, walked away from one Wednesday morning when Roman was 2 years old and too young to understand why his mother was carrying a single bag to a waiting car. Roman sat very still. I planned every detail, Elena said. I made myself invisible until the moment I left. And I never looked back, because I could not afford to. She looked at her son steadily. Your secretary planned every detail too. That is not the behavior of someone who panicked. That is the behavior of someone who was afraid of what would happen if she stayed. Roman drove back to the city that night and did not sleep at all. Marcus found Nadia 3 weeks later. He sat in his car outside her building for almost 3 hours before he got out. When she opened her door and saw him, she did not look surprised. She looked tired in the way of someone who had been expecting this moment and was simply glad it had finally arrived so she could deal with it. Roman sent you, she said. He knows where you are, Marcus said. He's not sending a team. I came alone. He paused. I think he wants to ask you something. Not tell you. Ask. You think, she said. I think, he agreed. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said she would consider it. She closed the door quietly. She did not lock it. Roman came 3 days later. Alone. No driver, no security. He parked 3 blocks away and walked the rest, which Nadia later learned from a neighbor who had seen him. It had been raining. He stood in her hallway when she opened the door, slightly damp, with the look of a man who had rehearsed this conversation many times and discarded every version of it. I want to talk to you, he said. You want to talk to me, she said, or you want me back? He was quiet long enough that she began to close the door. Then he said, both. But I understand that those are different things. She let him in. They sat at her small kitchen table, across from each other, with 2 cups of tea between them. No desks. No intercom. No building full of people who were afraid of him. He looked, Nadia thought, smaller here. Not lesser, just more human-sized. He told her about his mother's story. He told her that he had, for the first time in his life, looked up what he could find about his father, the men he had spent 40 years working to be nothing like, and that what he found had disturbed him in a way that business never had. He did not say that he loved her. He did not pretend to feelings he had not yet earned. He said that he understood, for the first time, that he had spoken to her as though she were a thing to be managed, and that he was ashamed of that. He said the word ashamed carefully, as though it were one he was using for the first time in a very long while. Nadia listened. Then she told him the truth, all of it. What 5 years of invisibility had felt like. What the night of the gala had meant to her, and what Monday morning had cost her. What it had felt like to stand in his office and hear the word staying used as a command. She spoke clearly, without anger, without tears, and without any desire to hurt him. She simply told the truth, because she had spent 5 years not telling it and she was finished with that. Roman listened. He did not interrupt. He did not defend himself. He sat and he listened, and Nadia noticed that his hands, which were usually so still and controlled, were pressed flat against the table as though he needed something to hold on to. When she finished, she laid out her terms. They were not angry terms. They were simply clear ones. She would not return to being his secretary, that chapter was finished and she had no desire to reopen it. She would not move back to the city until she chose to, on her own timeline. He would have no claim on the child through anything other than a legal agreement written by her lawyer. If he wished to be part of the child's life, he would build that role slowly and honestly, in full daylight, with no pressure and no force. If he violated any of these conditions even once, she would disappear again. And she told him, very calmly, that she had become quite good at disappearing. Roman looked at her for a long moment. Then he asked only one question. Are these terms for my benefit or yours? For the child's, she said. He nodded once. All right. And that was how it began, not with romance, not with grand gestures, but with a nod across a small kitchen table in a city where nobody knew either of their names. The months that followed were not easy, but they were honest. Roman began the slow, unglamorous work of becoming a different kind of man. He restructured parts of his company that he could no longer defend, not because Nadia asked him to, but because his mother's words had lodged in him like a splinter he could not ignore. He kept Tuesday evening phone calls, because Nadia had said Tuesday evenings worked. They talked about small things, a book she was reading, a problem he was working through, a restaurant in her neighborhood that made the best soup she had ever tasted. He listened more than he spoke. The calls grew longer each week. Neither of them mentioned it. The baby was born on a Tuesday morning in March, when the city was still gray and the trees had not yet decided what season it was. Roman was in the waiting room because that was where Nadia had asked him to be, and he stayed there, without argument, for 4 hours. When Dr. Okafor came out to him, she told him he had a daughter. He sat down in a plastic waiting room chair. He put his face in his hands. Not because he was sad. Because something that had been sealed shut inside him for a very long time had finally, with no warning, opened all the way. Nadia let him hold the baby that afternoon. He held her with a carefulness that was striking in a man who had never been careful with anything in his life. The baby, who had arrived in the world with a look of profound seriousness, wrapped her entire hand around his index finger and held on. Nadia watched his face in that moment. She did not fall in love with him then. She was too careful and too honest a person to allow something that large to happen that quickly. But she saw something in his face that she had never seen there before, something unguarded and real and entirely without armor, and she thought, perhaps. Not yet. But perhaps. They named the baby Lena, after Roman's mother, which was Nadia's idea. Roman was so surprised by this that he said nothing for a full minute, which was the longest he had ever been quiet in his life. 2 years on, Nadia and Roman were not together in any simple, definable way. They were something harder to name and more honestly earned, two people who had started from a difficult place and were building something careful and real and patient, one Tuesday phone call at a time. Nadia had started her own consulting firm. Roman had become, gradually and imperfectly, a better version of the man he had always had the capacity to be. Lena had his dark eyes and her mother's steadiness and a personality that suggested she was going to make both of them work very hard for a very long time. Nadia never regretted walking away. She had needed to walk away to understand that she had always had the right to. What she had found on the other side of that decision was not just safety, it was herself. The version of herself that did not make her feeling small to fit someone else's space. The version that sat at a table and spoke the truth without apology and waited to see if the other person could meet her there. Roman had met her there. Slowly. Imperfectly. But he had come. And sometimes, on Tuesday evenings, when Lena was asleep and the city was quiet and they were talking on the phone about nothing in particular, Nadia would catch herself smiling at something he said. And she would think, this is not the story I expected. But it is a real one. And real ones, she had learned, were worth far more than the perfect ones she used to imagine.